So, when you look at the consensus forecasts, most organizations were predicting about 2% growth this year. That's actually a very healthy economy. Coming out of this year, 2024, they were predicting about 1.2 to 1.5% growth. That was expected to accelerate to about 2% next year. That's very strong. That's very healthy growth. Commodity prices are strong. Global oil prices are relatively strong. We still have trade agreements with most countries in the world that still like us. The fundamentals of the Canadian economy are there. We don't need to panic. However, there's clearly a lot of change going on, and there's a lot of risk.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. In today's first episode of 2025, we are turning our focus to the economic outlook of the year, a year poised to present both significant opportunities and looming challenges for local and global economics alike. Joining us today is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge and a recognized expert in fostering municipal growth and resilience. Trevor shares his insights today on the key trends and threats that will shape 2025. From internal pressures like workforce transitions and fiscal constraints to external forces, including geopolitical tensions and global market shifts. Together, we will explore how Canada, Alberta, and municipalities can adapt to the uncertainty, harness emerging opportunities, and build strategies to strengthen economic resilience. Trevor, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for hosting us here at Economic Development Lethbridge.
Economic Development Lethbridge, right?
Economic Development Lethbridge. We did this last year in January, talking about the economic forecast of 2024. It is now a new year.
Hard to believe that. A year has gone by.
I know, 12 months seems like it was just yesterday. We were talking about what was coming up in 2024. There's been significant changes globally, internationally, here nationally, even just this week with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepping down. As an economist, what are you looking at in 2025 as a broad spectrum to start off with? What's your forecast for 2025 look like?
Well, that's the great thing about a forecast is everybody should have one, but they're probably going to be wrong, right? I think the key to remember here, no matter what you're reading on social media about all of the craziness that's going on in the U.S., the fundamentals of the Canadian economy are still strong, right?
Are they?
So, when you look at the consensus forecasts, most organizations were predicting about 2% growth this year. That's actually a very healthy economy. Coming out of this year, 2024, they were predicting about 1.2 to 1.5% growth. That was expected to accelerate to about 2% next year. That's very strong. That's very healthy growth. Commodity prices are strong. Global oil prices are relatively strong. We still have trade agreements with most countries in the world that still like us. The fundamentals of the Canadian economy are there. We don't need to panic. However, there's clearly a lot of change going on, and there's a lot of risk. And it's not just about what's happening north-south. Ukraine is still very much a challenge globally. Like, supply chain has been disrupted. We still have that conflict going on with no real end in sight. That still has implications, particularly for Western Canada. We are the breadbasket. We've had to step up and replace some of that global demand for food. We still have all kinds of chaos in the Middle East with a real risk that could broaden and affect more countries and pull in more things and further disrupt supply chains. And certainly, the fun things that are happening on social media of late, certainly with Trump's, musings about his position on Canada. But I think just as interestingly, the very timely and recent resignation of our Prime Minister, or pending resignation of our Prime Minister. So there is an enormous amount of risk and a lot of unknowns. So I think it's totally understandable that your viewers would be concerned about where do we go from here, that we don't really know the path forward. But strip away all the noise. Canada fundamentally is still in a reasonably good place. And yes, there would be pain if there were tariffs, and we can get into that. But if we ignore that and just look at the foundation, we're still in a pretty good place. There's reason to be optimistic.
What's the main reason to be optimistic? Because I look at, when I go grocery shopping and everyone else goes grocery shopping, they see sky-high prices for avocados, for steaks. And that doesn't give them a sense of optimism. That gives them a sense of, what am I going to have to cut back? What am I going to have to go without in 2025? What gives you the sense that 2025, we are on a stable foundation, even though we do have so many strings that are opposing our strong foundation?
Yeah, certainly when you go to the grocery store, and I was just over the weekend, bought some steaks, which was probably a mistake when I looked at the price tag, because I'm like, really, for that many? We feel the pain, and I think people are right to be concerned, and it certainly is top of mind for everyone. But in a global context, Canada's rate of inflation has slowed very significantly. We have the lowest inflation, actually, compared to many places in the world. We feel like our grocery prices are, among other things, are way higher than they should be, and that is probably true. But relative to other countries, our standard of living is still one of the highest in the world on a dollar-for-dollar basis, right? So we have to remember that even though maybe it feels different than it did 2 or 3 years ago, you look around to other countries, Europe in particular, enormous impacts of the Ukrainian conflict on energy pricing, food pricing. I have a lot of family in the UK, for example, so we're always comparing notes back and forth. Price of fuel, for example, in most other countries. And so we have to look at all of those things in context, which I get. That's very little comfort when you yourself are going through the aisle and you swiping your card and taking your basket, and it feels like there's a lot less in that basket than there was last year.
Would you be saying this on January 21st, 2025 still? And that is the day after President-elect Trump gets sworn into office. He is now president. Joe Biden's no longer president. He has said a lot, and I hate to pull the Band-Aid off right off the bat, but let's do it, because he is going to dictate a lot of what our economy goes through.
No question.
25% tariff on everything, and even though Premier Danielle Smith says she hopes it's not oil and gas, he hasn't said anything saying that it is not going to be oil and gas. Will you be changing your tune and saying, okay, we're not on that solid foundation? So
that's the asterisk, right? There's no question that President-elect Trump has said a number of outlandish things, and I think we have to take him seriously, right? He's not a serious person most of the time, but I think we have to take him and his threats very seriously. If you look at the people that he's surrounded himself with, like Pete Navarro, who's outwardly said Canada's not an ally, we're a competitor and a threat, right, when it comes to trade. So fundamentally, Canada is a trading country. If we look at Alberta specifically, 90% of our exports go to the United States. That's a massive chunk of our economy. Even if the tariffs are only 10%, or even if they're only on some goods and somehow, some oil and gas is exempted, it is going to have a massive impact. There will be pain in the short term, no question. We are going to see massive impacts. In fact, we're seeing it already. Look at the currency, right? I had a credit card transaction this morning, and I think my conversion rate was 148.
Whoa.
By the time all is said and done. So in the next 3 to 6 months, even the threats that Trump has issued, even if he doesn't follow through on all of them, are going to disrupt our economy. We are going to see instability, and I think you're going to see a pullback. Companies are not going to make investment decisions. I think people are going to maybe think twice about travel decisions. That's going to have an impact. But long term, despite what he says, the United States needs everything Canada produces, right? We are their largest supplier of oil and gas. We are one of their largest suppliers of forestry products. We're 20% of the automotive industry that flows into the United States. The United States needs Canada.
Agriculture, all those economic drivers, particularly in Western Canada, seem to be on edge right now. Is 2025, we talk about the forecast, is 2025 going to be sort of a wait and see year where not much is going to, you talk about the investment opportunities, the growth that businesses are going to look at. Because of everything that's happening down south, will businesses here say, okay, let's steady as she go 2025, and then 2026, once we've got a year behind Donald Trump, we can potentially change and see what's going to happen. And we haven't even talked about our own federal election that is scheduled for this year.
Yeah, I do think, similar to what you saw in COVID, companies pulled back, people were managing risk, both your own household budget, if you're not sure what tomorrow brings or whether you're going to be employed next week. If you're a company, you're not going to embark on a major capital investment program and expand buildings until you know what the lay of the land is. I think you will see a pullback as people sort of hold off. The key, and I think...
Is that bad for our GDP, though?
It has the potential to cause a slowdown. ATB Economics in Alberta said, the best case scenario for Alberta, for example, all else being equal, GDP in Alberta should grow 2.5% this year. That's pretty healthy growth. That's stronger than 2024. They said worst case scenario, if there's a massive tariff threat, let's say Trump actually goes higher than the 25%, for example, and it includes oil and gas, they've said for Alberta, that actually could be a reduction in GDP by about 0.8, so less than 1%. Now, that's not great. Anytime you shrink, that's never good, but it's also not minus 10.
Yeah.
So, minus 1% will be painful. There will be job loss. We would feel that. And again, that's the worst case scenario, to be clear. But that's also not a catastrophe. And there are people, whether you agree with their politics or not, I think Premier Ford and Premier Smith have done a very good job of getting on Fox News consistently, regularly with the same message. Hey, we're a loyal, trusted trade partner. We're here to be your friends. You need what we have to produce. They're trying to get that message, to that circle of influence around the current administration. And that, to me, is really the work that we all have, whether we're municipal leaders, business leaders. If we have family, friends, contacts in the United States, we all need to be sharing that same message. Hey, we need you, you need us. Maybe you can educate people that a trade deficit is not a subsidy. The United States does not subsidize Canada. We can work through some of the basics, but having those conversations, I think, in the next few months, really hammering home, that we're better together, we are stronger united. This fortress North America really is the way to go to offset what China's doing and what Russia's doing.
Where does Mexico play in this? Because Ford, you talk about Doug Ford, he's been mentioning on Fox News in every interview I see him with, Canada's not the problem, it's Mexico the problem. And they're basically playing the pointing finger game, right? It's not my fault, it's your fault, it's not my fault, it's your fault. So where does Mexico, because that's where the manufacturing is getting shipped to. And while it looks like Donald Trump is looking at Canada and not Mexico because he wants to build that wall, does Mexico have a play in this whole economic forecast for not just North America, but for Canada as well?
For sure, Mexico plays a huge role, and I don't think Doug Ford's finger pointing is very helpful. That's not. It might, in the short term, deflect some of the heat from us, but again, at the end of the day, North America has a fairly integrated economy. We need to be working together more closely. The rise of China's economic clout, the rise of India's economic clout, India being now the most populous country in the world. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico combined are a force to be reckoned with. Each of us individually is disadvantaged. And so the more we can work together, the more we can integrate. We have opportunities like CPKC, for example, right? The merger of that railway, you can now ship through all three countries on an integrated network. There are very few places in the world where the flow of goods is that easy. And a significant chunk of, as you pointed out, manufacturing capacity is in Mexico. Yes, some of that you may be able to claw back to the United States, but fundamentally you need access to that capacity. There's no way the United States has enough talented employees to actually take that work back. They already have sort of full employment in many areas, right?
Employment's going to be one of the major things that a lot of people are going to be looking at this year. Unemployment rate is, if it's going to go up, going to go down. Traditionally, it goes down in January because people get laid off from their seasonal jobs. So there's a little dip and then it comes back up. What are you looking for at for the job numbers this year? Do you think it's going to be static and sort of steady as she goes, like the economy, or is it going to see a rise or dip because of COVID-19? We saw more people scale back and more people get laid off.
Nationally, Canada has seen a rise in unemployment. We have seen that rate go up. We have seen in most regions of the country.
But here in Alberta, it hasn't, though.
It has, yeah. Like Edmonton and Calgary are close to 8%. Right, and that's significantly higher than the national number, and it's certainly worse than we were even a year ago. Lethbridge, a little closer to home for me, we're sitting at 5.7 here. We're among the better of the prairie urban areas, but that was 4.3 a year ago. So we have seen unemployment rise nationally, and we will, I think, see unemployment rise again this year. Again, if you're a company, you might not, you're pulling back, you're conserving, you're worried about risk. It's not just those capital investments. You might not hire those 4 people you were thinking about. It's like, let's just make do. We're going to leave those positions vacant. I think you're going to see some instability, some fluctuations. again, we've seen industries gain strength. So locally, our manufacturing sector has grown significantly. Our service sector has grown significantly. But we have seen a pullback in the public sector, right, as governments align budgets. So each area of our province and each area of the country is going to be affected differently, of course, based on what your core industries are and the nature of things. I think overall, Canada will probably weather this storm, but there will be some pain along the way.
One of the things that we did not talk about, because I listened to it as I was driving down here today for this interview, in 2024, we did not mention the word AI once. Now, that is on the top of everyone's
For sure it is.
Every business is looking at how they can integrate AI. Municipalities are looking at how they can integrate AI into their municipalities, businesses, people in day-to-day life. How is AI going to impact the job market and the economy in 2025?
Yeah, I don't think we can discount the impact or the potential impacts. I think about my own organization. We're using an AI tool to help entrepreneurs, for example. So we've created a data repository of training materials and other resources so that if we don't have a business advisor, a live human that's available at that moment, an individual can go and use this tool and get the answers that they need. That's very empowering, provides access. There's some great advantages. But notice it didn't change the need for those business advisors. They're still employed. They still have expertise that AI can't replicate. AI is simply a tool that enhances access and enhances availability. And so, again, I don't think there should be a mass panic around AI is going to end all the things. There's no question that it's changing jobs. It's going to impact different industries differently.
Is there one more than the other?
Well, again, I think it comes down to a lot of routine tasks that you can automate. The creative industries. So, for example, a lot of this kind of thing, you used to have someone that was going to edit and someone who was going to composite and someone who's going to do audio. There's now apps for that, and you hit a button and it's done automatically. Right, so that has changed.
Not that I use it. I don't.
It's all manual. It's very labor intensive.
Those creative people out there are yelling at me right now. I don't.
But I think that the nature of that work has changed. But what it's done is allowed you to do things differently, leverage other tools, and AI is going to open up other opportunities. And it's the same with automation, right? When robots were first introduced into manufacturing, everyone was freaking out that thousands of jobs were going to be lost. There were some entry level, very hard labor. Lovingly, I used to call those the jobs that suck. The jobs that nobody wanted to do, many of them were automated and eliminated. Good. What it did was create more higher skilled technician, training, troubleshooting, electrical service kinds of roles. And I think AI is going to be the same. There will be industries that are impacted more than others. There will be job change and job loss, but it is going to create other opportunities. And the fact is that ship has sailed. AI is here. It's only getting smarter. It's only getting faster. That's why I'm very nice to my laptop, just in case it takes over the world. I want it to remember me fondly.
Skynet's coming.
I want Skynet to know that I was a supporter from the beginning. But the reality is we now need to figure out how do we leverage these tools? How does Canada lead in this space? And a good example of that, I think, is Alberta's strategy to attract data centers and specifically AI data centers. There's billions of dollars being spent on these facilities. Why can't we have those come here and link it to renewable power and abandoned wells and build on our province's strengths to access this new industry and new opportunity? And so, rather than fight AI or fear AI, it's more about how does your business, how does your municipality, how does your community leverage it, be a part of the journey, and take advantage of it.
So I want to work my way backwards from the three levels of government. I want to start federal, then talk provincial, then talk municipal, if you don't mind. This is the first year that we could potentially see, first year since 1992, that we could see three prime ministers in 1 year. Justin Trudeau resigned. New leader is going to be appointed or elected by March. And we have an election in March, or we potentially have one when it's scheduled in October.
Shortly thereafter.
Exactly. How does the federal government navigate this sort of rocky time that we're in when there's so much craziness going on? And I hate to call it silly season, but it is truly silly season at the federal level right now. So what do people need to do and look at to ensure that their portfolios are safe and their pocketbooks are safe?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that we do still have a functioning federal government. Just because Parliament...
According to Twitter, that's not the case.
Just because Parliament is prorogued doesn't mean everything stops. You still have all kinds of federal government departments with really talented and skilled people that are doing their jobs executing programs. The complexity is there's maybe not as great direction, there's clarity, there's ambiguity. But fundamentally, core programs, people are still going to get their EI and CPP checks. Unfortunately, you're still going to have to pay your taxes. Those returns will still get processed. There may be not, new initiatives. There may be some questions about grants and other things, but the government doesn't enter into a black hole except for the actual campaign of an election itself. That's when the government goes into caretaker mode. But beyond that, things are still functioning. I think people...
But there could be seismic shifts.
There could.
Because from Justin Trudeau to whoever the next Liberal leader is, it could be Chrétien to Martin, Turner to Chrétien.
Right.
There could be significant changes, whether it be the carbon tax, whether it be budgetary items, because they have to bring back a budget once
defund the CBC. I mean, there's
Exactly,
all of
right?
those
There's
kinds of
all
things.
those different things. So is there something that you're going to be looking at from a federal perspective that you're going to sort of see as an indicator of where the next leader and potentially next prime minister or next prime minister will be taking the country?
Yeah, there's no question there will be a shift, whether there's a change in the ultimate final prime minister or just within the Liberal Party itself. So, your question around what should people do, I think you need to plan for a higher risk environment. So typically that means people moving more to cash, moving away perhaps from volatility. It means, thinking about, depending on your age and depending where you're at in your cycle, maybe not taking, those risk opportunities. You might not want to change career. I mean, be prudent in thinking about your planning. There is no question there is going to be change. And right now, all of the indications are that you will probably see a change to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party. And if that's the case, we know there will be a focus on shrinking government, which, again, I come back to Lethbridge, we have a significant provincial and federal government presence here. So, when people say reduce government spending, that has actual real implications for employment and our local economy because we have an oversized chunk that comes from public dollars, right? So, communities like Lethbridge need to be thinking about that. Ottawa clearly would be the same. So, I think we will see this time of so-called smaller government, which means reducing those discretionary amounts. And that's the real key, is most federal government spending is preordained, right? You can't really adjust EI or CPP or not, some of these entitlement health. Most of those stay the same regardless of who's in power. There's really only a very small chunk of the federal budget, it's less than 40%, that the government actually can adjust and move up and down. And we know we have to spend more on military. That's,
Because we have to hit the GDP.
getting to at least the 2%
2%,
number,
yep.
which Trump yesterday said should be 5%. So there's some decisions to be made there. But there's really not a lot that's discretionary to the government. So, again, thinking about your reliance on federal programs, how that impacts your career, your industry, and understanding what those shifts could look like. I don't think it's any surprise where the Conservatives stand on most policy issues. So if you believe that they could be elected, now is the time to start thinking about what that could translate to in terms of how does it hit you personally in your pocketbook.
Talking provincially now, you talk about the short-term ramifications of what happens down south, and you'll see it in the short term rather than long term. This provincial government, every provincial government will be at the table right now looking at their potential 2025 budget.
Right.
Provincial budget, which is going to impact social services, which is going to impact hospitals, which is going to impact municipalities. What are you looking for provincially for the economy to sort of weather the storm that is going on globally, nationally, and domestically?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Alberta is very reliant on oil and gas revenues. It's not.
Which we already know it's going down.
And we know the forecasted prices, it's going to come down. And that, forget what's happening in the U.S. OPEC has already said they plan to increase production. It is unlikely that the global oil price is going to meet the provincial government's requirement. And I think the Premier herself even said, this income tax cut that was proposed looks very unlikely because we know revenues are going to go down. So we were already expecting a bit of a disaster there. That's only going to be amplified if we see tariffs and export controls placed on oil and gas. For Alberta, that's going to be very, very painful. We will see probably big deficits. We will see some real challenges. I guess the bright spot of that is if it's short term, Alberta has enormous fiscal capacity. Unlike other smaller provinces, we have very deep pockets. We have the ability to borrow. We have the ability to run massive deficits if we need to, that could then be paid back, which is the key. Governments don't always do a good job of that. So Alberta can weather the storm if it's a short-term thing, but I think there's no question we are going to see some pain, and we're going to know, I think, very quickly in the next couple of weeks here what that picture looks like.
What's the first indicator for you that it's going to be painful?
Well, again, if you think about a 25% tariff on our export, most of which goes to the U.S., it is our largest portion of our exports.
Okay, so I think I should have asked this at the beginning because we talked about Donald Trump a few times already, and I should have asked this right off the top. Explain to me, like a 2-year-old, what the hell a tariff is, because people are out there on social media, and I see it all the time, that's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt us. So how do you say it's going to hurt us when you're telling me that when I see on social media, which is, you should always believe what's on social media, especially in today's age, that it's actually not going to hurt us. So how do you say to people, it's actually going to hurt us a lot more? They're going to pay for it, but that means they're going to stop buying from us.
Yeah, it's a great question. And if you listen to the rhetoric that's on the southern side of the border, they're like, oh, well, it's a tax that somebody else is going to pay. So let's say we build widgets, right? We have a widget. We produce this widget here in Lethbridge for $10 per widget, and we ship that to the U.S., right? The U.S. says we're going to apply a 25% tariff to your widget. So a tariff is essentially a tax. It's a duty that applies to my widget. So my $10 widget crosses the 49th parallel. We add 25%, it's going to cost the consumer in the U.S. $12.50, right? So the end consumer in the United States actually loses the most, because instead of paying $10 for the widget, they're now paying $12.50. That will drive inflation up in the U.S., but what it will do likely is, number one, they'll probably stop buying my widgets if they can find a cheaper widget in the U.S., right? Because my widget just became, or China or somewhere else. So if there's maybe an $11 widget in the U.S. that they wouldn't have bought 6 months ago because mine was $10, now that mine is $12.50, they're going to move to the $11 widget in the U.S., which is the goal.
It does impact our economy.
100%.
The rhetoric that we're hearing is, it's only going to be the states that are going to suffer. They're going to still buy our maple syrup.
So in the short term, I might see that I sell less widgets. So that's the impact to me as the producer and my staff and my employees here. The long-term implication is if that tariff stays in place, now it makes sense either for me to move my widget factory to the U.S. and produce them there so I don't have to worry about the tariff, or somebody in the U.S. sees that there's now a market opportunity and they produce the widgets themselves, and so they no longer need me at all. Right? So in the short term, my sales will probably drop. That affects my revenues and what I can pay my employees. But in the long term, maybe I lose that business completely. And so that's the bigger concern of the potential long-term impacts of tariffs. And we've already seen Canadian manufacturers that produce durable goods say that they would move capacity to the U.S. to avoid that risk.
Looking at the last level of government before we wrap up here.
The most important as a mayor.
Of course, especially for me, for those municipal leaders who are listening to this. Municipalities are the creature of the province.
Yes.
They get money from the province. They have property taxes that they get to play with. I shouldn't say play with, but that's their main source of revenue every year is property taxes.
Correct.
Municipalities struggled in 2024. Their budgets had to get slashed, or they had to increase property taxes by 3-4. In one case in BC, 38%.
But even 8, 9, 10, we've seen some very significant increases.
I'm not looking forward to my property tax bill in Calgary, so let's just leave it at that for a second. How do municipalities weather? We talk about the province weathering the storm, and you talk about the oil and gas, but how does the municipalities, when they are so reliant on the provincial government to give them money, and if oil and gas in Alberta, there are transfers, or LGFF is tied to the oil and gas revenue, which if it goes down, that means they get less money. If it goes up, it gets more. So it sounds like, just playing devil's advocate here, it's not going to be looking good for the next few years. How do municipalities have to weather this storm while trying to understand they still need to deliver services? Is that nasty A word on the table?
Well, again, municipalities really only have two choices. You can either increase revenues, which typically means increasing taxes, or you can decrease expenses.
Yeah.
Just as your own home
Which
budget.
means cutting services.
You can either earn more or you can spend less, which typically means reducing services. So that's sort of the basic model municipalities have to work within. However, I think there are options to think differently. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. On the revenue side, are there other ways to drive revenues? Are there other opportunities? So we have seen, for example, some municipalities are more active in the development game. They're doing joint ventures to build housing, to build industrial lots that, again, depending on where you sit on the political spectrum, should government be in the business of competing with business? But are there times and places where a municipal government can be a patient long-term developer and, can receive revenues in the long run? So again, speaking for Sterling as mayor, we have acquired some private land that was for sale. We have invested in infrastructure, and we're going to do some housing lots that wouldn't otherwise have come to the market. But those 5 lots times the average tax rate for me from now to the end of time is a significant new source of revenue. We didn't increase taxes. We simply enabled incremental revenues, right? We also, a number of years ago, created a municipal corporation, and we do energy retailing, right? Now, that's not for everyone, but we own our own energy retailer. In Alberta's deregulated market, you can do that. And that drives incremental non-tax revenue back to our municipality. So again, I don't think taxes is the right answer because nobody, including me, wants to pay more taxes. But are there other sources of revenue? Are there other things that you can bring in? That's number one. And then on the expense side, obviously reducing services is where everybody goes to. But are there other ways to deliver services? Now, everybody uses the word innovation and efficiency like it's overused, but realistically, there are sometimes ways to really dig deep into the details and really critically think about why do you have the things that you do. So for example, we no longer have our own garbage truck. We partner with a neighboring municipality, the town of Raymond. We were looking at having the capital replacement of our truck. Not great utilization. We only really needed it fundamentally probably a day and a half a week. So we actually now contract them to do that service for us. Like many municipalities, we belong to regional commissions and regional services. And I really think that municipalities have to think critically about why do we do the things that we do? Is there another, not just reduced service, but is there another way to deliver this service? Is there another partner? Can we fundamentally rethink our approach?
Is that a bad time to start doing that now, though? Because literally in Alberta and in Newfoundland and Labrador, as of January 1st, we're officially in election season. I don't care if you're not filing your paperwork until September when the official nomination day is. It is officially silly season municipally in 2 provinces in this country. And that means ideology gets thrown out the window and my case for re-election becomes my center focus.
Right.
And I'm not painting a broad stroke. I'm not saying.
But every 4 years, that's the system.
It is. With everything else going on right now, municipalities are stuck between a rock and a hard place right now, aren't they?
Well, the best time would have been 4 or 5 years ago. And so municipalities that have not yet done that work, I think there's no time like the present. Never waste a good crisis, as the saying goes. Like, things are going to change this year. There is going to be impacts. Municipalities, every leader at every level needs to be in front of it. So I would hope that municipal leaders can put aside some of the politics, put aside some of their own personal motivations, and try to figure out what's going to be best and go into an election with that win. Say, hey, we came together and we did this. There's no better platform in my mind.
Talking about Economic Development Lethbridge for 2 seconds before I wrap up. What's your hope for the region as you head into 2025?
Yeah, we've been working very actively with the region on Canada's premier food corridor. So along Highway 3, promoting this region as the primary food corridor for the country. We've had a lot of government and industry support on that. That's going very well. That message really resonates when we're in other places promoting this region. We're starting to look at the same principle along Highway 4 towards the Coots border crossing, and really, we call it Canada's Western Gateway. So really focused on this region as a logistics, warehousing, and distribution hub. And we've actually signed an MOU, and we're partnered with Great Falls, Montana, to build an international cross-border partnership. Now, maybe Trump will deploy troops and stop us from working with our neighbors, who knows? But again, we're taking ownership of, we know that a regional strategy makes sense. Lethbridge is a beautiful city. Lethbridge is a great place to visit, but Lethbridge is only 112,000 people. It's too small to compete globally by itself. But as a region, we have enormous expertise, horsepower, and resources that if we can go to market as a region, we're going to have a much bigger presence.
So what is the region?
Well, again, it depends a little bit.
Did you say Coos? Because I'm thinking that's Warner, the county of Warner. So would that technically fall underneath the...
Right. So we have it depends on the initiative. So we have programs like the Highway 4 and Highway 3 corridors that are very specific to that piece of real estate. We have the Regional Innovation Network of Southern Alberta, which supports entrepreneurs, which is basically Okotoks South. Yep. And we work with about 19 different partners, including the 2 First Nations that are closest to us, to support entrepreneurs across the region. And in some cases, when it comes to renewable power, for example, we've partnered from the BC border to the Saskatchewan border all across Southern Alberta. So region really depends on the project and the initiative, but we're collaborating collectively wherever it makes sense strategically.
And a great partner, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this or not, but Southgrow as well. I'm talking to them next week if you want to tune in for that episode.
Shameless self-plug there.
What?
No, but Southgrow is a good example of a regional economic development alliance and are one of our key partners in the work that we do.
Looking at 2025 as a whole, what are you looking at? What's the one thing that if we're all going to get through this, everything's going to be hunky-dory day, what's the one thing that you're going to be looking at in the short term and then in the long term to make sure that the Sea of Canada is going to weather this storm?
For me, the key tool is us just continuing to have adult conversations, right? Rational, fact-based decision-making. We need to get past some of the rhetoric. We need to get past, don't just rely on social media. Policymakers, stakeholders, whether it's government, whether it's industry, we just need to talk to each other and have conversation. Because the more we can dialogue, the more we can look for solutions, the more I think we can kind of figure this stuff out. And to me, so that's the one key thing is just keep talking. We need to just work through these things and be rational. And then to me, the second thing is remember the fundamentals. Right? We have a strong economy. We have a diversified economy. We have lots of global players that we're connected to. We have strong relationships with Asia Pacific. We have strong relationships with Europe. It's time now to think long-term and strategically, and I think reduce our dependence on the U.S. That's not going to happen overnight, and certainly in the short term, we will feel the pain. But I hope this motivates us to think more broadly and really start to truly take this diversification, not only of what we do and the value added in our industries, but to diversify who we sell to and who our customers are.
Trevor, always a pleasure.
Likewise, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights. To stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes and the entire Cross-Border Network catalog, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite platform or follow us on social media at Cross-Border Networks on all your favorite social media networks. For even more content and help learn more about the stories and people that we feature on this show, visit us online at crossborderinterviews.ca. Your support means the world to us. So share this episode with your friends, your family, your community, and help keep the conversation going. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time here on Municipal Affairs. Till then, everyone.